Faster than a speeding bullet.
I ran until my muscles burned and my veins pumped battery acid.
More powerful than a locomotive.
An idea is like a virus. Resilient. Highly contagious.
Able to leap tall buildings in a single bound.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Better Humanology Podcast. Jared Moon here. Today we have Dr. Steven Gundry. So he's a renowned cardiologist. He actually worked as a surgeon of cardiology for 30 years, and not just kind of did it. He was the best, and a lot of surgeries and operations are now named after him. But this path led him down to helping people initially who had heart disease and trying to fix that. And it led him to, you could probably guess, nutrition. And he is a New York Times bestselling author and medical researcher. And the book that he most recently put out is called The Plant Paradox. And I highly recommend that you check this book out. We talk about a lot of the concepts and philosophies today in this interview, but it is very, very fascinating stuff. I love his work, and he's a very intelligent man. So let's get into it with Dr. Steven Gundry. All right, Dr. Gundry, super pumped to have you on the Better Humanology Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, I'm happy to be here.
So we're going to get started by breaking the ice a little bit here with a fitness challenge. You think you could provide one for the listeners today?
Yeah. I tell you what, I think first thing this morning, I want everybody to do a wall sit and back yourself up against the wall, sit down against the wall, and hold it for 2 minutes. No cheating. That's a pretty good start for the day.
Yeah, that's a great start to any morning. All right, how about a mental toughness challenge?
Mental toughness is getting your first foot out the door for a 3-mile run when it is 20 degrees outside.
Yeah, that takes some
dark.
That takes some mental toughness for sure. Is that the weather that you're facing right now?
No, I'm in Palm Springs.
Oh yeah, that's right.
But I used to live in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I know cold. So
very cold. Yeah. Wow. All right, and how about a book recommendation?
Oh, can I recommend my book?
Of course, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it today. So go ahead.
The Plant Paradox, my best-selling book. But another one that I think if people are really looking for an interesting way of looking at what I talk about in the Plant Paradox is a book called The Secret Life of Trees.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
Give them a whole different crazy look of, you might be impressed with how smart trees are.
Yeah, I will definitely add that to the list. Thank you for the recommendation.
No problem.
All right, now, for anyone listening who may not know who you are or about your work, which you have a very impressive career and your books are amazing. So if you could just give us a little background information, what you do and what you're passionate about now.
Yeah, I was a chairman and professor of cardiothoracic surgery at Loma Linda University in Southern California for a number of years. And I got famous for doing baby heart transplants and inventing devices to keep the heart alive during heart surgery and designing a lot of operations that actually carry my name. And that's cool, but in the late 90s, a gentleman by the name of Big Ed, or at least I call him Big Ed in my books, changed my life when he demonstrated that with a diet and taking some supplements, he could clean out most of the blockages in his coronary arteries. And I thought that was rather impossible. But I was fortunate enough as an undergraduate at Yale University to have a special major where I defended a thesis that you could take a great ape, modify its food supply and modify its environment, and predict that you would create a human being. And I actually defended that thesis. So when I met Big Ed, I was a big fat guy, even though I was running 30 miles a week and going to the gym 1 hour every day and eating a healthy, low-fat diet. And so I put myself on my thesis, which I had kept, and I lost 50 pounds the first year, and I've lost 70 total pounds. And I put my patients that I operated on this program, and all sorts of amazing things started happening to them. Their high blood pressure went away, their diabetes went away, their arthritis went away. So I resigned my position at Loma Linda in 2002 and set up the institute that I founded in Palm Springs, where I basically asked people to change what they ate and to go buy some supplements at a health food store. And every 3 months, I would draw a bunch of blood work on them that insurance would pay for, and we'd see what would happen. And that started my first book in 2008, which was called Dr. Gundry's Diet Evolution. And after that, a ton of people with autoimmune disease started showing up in my doorstep. And now about half of my practice is reversal of autoimmune disease. And as we studied what causes autoimmune disease, it's actually foods. I published my second book this year, which is called The Plant Paradox, The Hidden Dangers in Healthy Foods That Cause Disease and Weight Gain. And that book's been a big hit. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for 13 weeks. It was on the Amazon top 100 books for 7 straight months. So that's probably why we're talking today.
Yeah, that's a big part of it, and I appreciate the introduction there. You provide a lot of information that I want to dive into. So moving from being a surgeon to what you're doing now, how was that? I guess
that's crazy, right?
Yeah. How was that transition for you?
Yeah, it's the day I decided. I looked in the mirror actually on a Friday, and it's kind of funny. My wife calls that day Black Friday because I really felt that I could teach people how to reverse their diseases, originally coronary artery disease, with food, and I didn't have to cut them open. And it's really dumb. Even an academic heart surgeon makes a pretty decent living to stop doing that. And teaching people how to eat isn't exactly lucrative. So, but the cool thing is, I'm like a kid in a candy store because every day, I get to see somebody really take control of their life, that they thought they were doing all the right things and still had some challenging health issues or just wanted to get better. And lo and behold, every day, I really get to see miracles. So I get up every day and pretty happy guy.
Yeah, and you are changing a lot of lives, and you've done that over the course of your 2 books. And if we could hop into that first book, the Diet Evolution, what's the premise there? Like, what were you trying to help people do in your first book?
The first book was really sending dietary and actually exercise information to your genes. And your genes actually monitor your behavior. They monitor the foods you eat. They monitor whether you're a good animal or a lousy animal. And your genes actually make large amounts of decisions about whether you should be kept around or whether you ought to be voted off the island. And the book was a guidebook on both eating to tell your genes that you're a pretty cool animal, and also exercise program. And then some tips on longevity, on how you keep this going on.
And you said Big Ed was the one, he inspired that first book?
Yeah, Big Ed. Well, Big Ed changed my life, and basically something I had forgot from my studies at Yale, that you didn't need to have coronary artery disease. You didn't need to have high blood pressure. You didn't need to have diabetes. They're absolutely abnormal. People who don't eat like us don't have, for example, these diseases. And we were taught in traditional medicine that this is family history, this is genetics. And, if your father had this, you're going to have this, or if your mother had diabetes, you're going to have it. And in fact, it's not true. What we do know is that if your parents had a disease and you eat like your parents, then you will get that disease. But if you don't eat like your parents, you won't get that disease. And so that's Big Ed was one of the guys who, shook me back to reality, I guess, that most people have actually complete control over what they tell their genes. And all we got to do is give you a few hints about how to do that.
And I love that, because what you're doing is you're putting people back in the driver's seat. There's so many people who are resigned to what you just said. My dad had this, I'll probably die before the age of 40 because he did, or, all of these different stories that people tell themselves, and they just kind of sign off on. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy sometimes, because they get this information in their head in their teens or 20s, and maybe they just go down that path inadvertently. And so you're saying absolutely not. Everyone is in control. It's just a matter of simply changing your diet.
Yeah. For instance, yesterday I put out on Instagram a quote from Karl Bard, which is actually perfect for this conversation. And he said, though no one can go back and make a brand new start, anyone can start now and make a brand new ending. And one of the really principles of the first book is that it's actually never too late to make a new start. And I'll share you a story actually from the second book, which started long before I published the first book. I had this 85-year-old woman who came to me. She had coronary artery disease, she had diabetes, she had horrible arthritis, she had high blood pressure, but she said, you've got to keep me alive because I have a disabled daughter who I'm the sole caregiver for. And I don't want her to end up in an institution, and you've got to keep me alive. And so we took on that challenge, and we just celebrated her 96th birthday, and she's on no medications. She is now, she dyes her hair bright red. She used to be a model when she was young, and she's dating a much younger man now. And she, 11 years now, she's been a new person, all because she changed really what she ate. And one of the things that I talk about in Diet Evolution is we change about 90% of our cells every 3 months. And we have in us tons of stem cells. Stem cells get a lot of press, but there's plenty of stem cells in all of us. And what we have to do is new cells, we have to give them the proper nutrition to build good cells. And if you do that, you'll have a whole new person very, very quickly. And that's one of the exciting things that people see happen to them. They see their skin change, they see pain in their joints go away. And I wouldn't have believed any of this unless I, number one, saw it in myself or saw it in my patients. But one of the things I've done in both books is I've published my results that food and actually certain supplements dramatically change biomarkers of aging, of forming cholesterol inside your blood vessels, of flexibility in blood vessels. And so this is real, it's not anecdotal.
And if you could give us a, bird's eye view of what you think people should be eating or should not be eating.
Yeah, in the new book, The Plant Paradox, I have several rules. And rule number one is really contrary to what nutritional advice people hear. And rule number one is it's not what I tell you to eat that's important. It's actually what I tell you not to eat that's important. And it's far more important to take certain foods out of your diet that are killing you than it is for me to tell you, eat a bag of lettuce every day, which is actually not a bad idea. But so the principles in the second book, The Plant Paradox, revolve around a plant protein that's called a lectin, Lectin. Some people think I'm saying the word leptin, which is a hunger hormone. Some people think I'm saying the word lecithin, which is an emollient. It's a lectin. And briefly, lectins are the plant defense system against being eaten. And as strange as it may seem, plants are not here for us. They were here first. They had it really good before animals arrived because nobody wanted to eat them. When animals arrived, and the first animals were insects, plants had a problem because they couldn't run, they couldn't hide, and they couldn't fight. But plants have a huge power of being chemists. And what they do is use chemical warfare against their predators, including us. And they use lectins, which are proteins that bind to sugar molecules in our gut, in our joints, in our nerves, in our blood vessels, and they incite an inflammatory response. Excuse me. And the interesting thing is, the idea is if an animal isn't feeling good, or if it hurts, or doesn't think well, or is depressed, the smart animal says, every time I eat these things, I'm not doing very well, and I think I'll go eat something else. And this is the plant strategy. Unfortunately, humans arrived, and as most of us know, we're pretty stupid. and so when we eat things that actually cause us to have pain, for instance, in our joints, or if we have heartburn as another example, or if we actually are depressed or anxious, we continue to eat those things. They're actually causing it. And we take NSAIDs like Advil or Aleve, or we take Prilosec OTC or Nexium, or we take an antidepressant and just keep eating these things. And what I've found is that if I can convince my readers and my patients to take what appear to be healthy foods out of their diet, all this stuff goes away. And it's crazy, but we've actually proven it, and we can prove it in blood work. And if you read a lot of the Amazon reviews of The Plant Paradox, it's not crazy, because people who have followed this without even meeting me write in and tell about their big changes. Their autoimmune diseases go away, their depression goes away, their arthritis goes away. So it's really works. So to get back to your question, what shouldn't you eat? We're not designed to eat grains and beans. We never ate a grain or a bean until 10,000 years ago, when agriculture started. And interestingly enough, humans were actually very tall creatures. We were about 6 feet tall back then. Our brain size was 15% bigger than it is today. 2,000 years into agriculture, 8,000 years ago, we had shrunk to about 5 foot, and our brain size had collapsed to its present size. And that's all because we shifted from eating leaves and tubers and fish and animals to eating grains and beans. And you can prove, and I do in the plant paradox, that the lectins in grains and beans, particularly whole grains, are the cause of us shrinking and our brain shrinking. So those are two biggies. The other biggie that I think is getting more and more attention, some of it thanks to Tom Brady and his diet of eliminating the nightshade family of plants. And the reason this is important is that all of us in America are not from America, regardless of what Donald Trump thinks. We're from Europe, Asia, or Africa. And so none of us ever ate an American lectin-containing plant until 500 years ago when Columbus started trade. And some of our most beloved plants are some of our most deadly plants, and those are the nightshades. And the nightshades are potatoes, eggplant, tomatoes, peppers, and goji berries. Believe it or not, goji berries are from America. They were taken to China in trade where they grew very well. So even goji berries are a nightshade. The other American plants that are pretty doggone lethal are the beans, cashews, and peanuts. They're not nuts at all. They're beans, they're legumes. Cashews are actually the poison ivy family, and I don't see a lot of people thinking they should eat poison ivy. Peanuts have been shown in monkeys to produce coronary artery disease. And the other American seeds, sunflower seeds, chia seeds, and pumpkin seeds. And then the American grains, corn and quinoa. Corn is so deadly that the French banned corn as unfit for human consumption in 1900 after a rash of mental retardation happened to northern Italians when they adapted corn as their starch, polenta. And the French believed, as they still do, that corn is useful for one thing, and that's for fattening pigs for slaughter. So, in fact, Americans, if you look at the carbon molecules that make us up, you can identify corn as a particular carbon molecule. 70% of the average American is corn-based carbon, versus 5% of Europeans are corn-based. And again, this is a food that we never encountered until 500 years ago. So that's kind of the basis of the book, getting these particular foods out of your diet and returning to what we used to eat. And it's actually not a paleo diet, although a paleo diet is a good start. As I talk about in the book, a paleo diet is designed to make you an ancestor. It's designed to make you grow up fast, have babies, and then die. And I give a lot of evidence for that in the book. So all my paleo friends out there, I love you, but there's a couple of tweaks you need to make.
So do you get a lot of pushback when you tell someone, coming to you, and maybe they think that they're eating relatively healthy, you tell them that they need to cut all of these things out of their diet? What's the typical response to that? I mean, probably a little bit better now that you have a New York Times bestselling book. A lot of people are aware of it, but in your practice, when you first started telling people this is what they need to cut out, what was the response?
Well, basically what I say is, how is all that healthy eating working out for you? Because I was doing this healthy diet, and yet I had all these issues. I had high blood pressure, pre-diabetes, high cholesterol. I had migraine headaches. I actually did baby heart transplants with migraine headaches, and I don't recommend that. And I was doing all this healthy eating. I was eating a low-fat vegetarian diet because Loma Linda is an Adventist institution which promotes vegetarianism and vegan. And I take care of tons of vegetarians and vegans, but I ask them to get these certain foods out of their vegetarian and vegan diet. And It's pretty amazing, even from the first blood work, when people can do a deep dive into what's actually happening inside of them, and they, can see how within 3 months, what a change out of what appeared to be healthy eating did to their blood work, did to the inflammatory cytokine markers that we could measure, did to their cholesterol, did to their high blood pressure. Just actually saw a patient yesterday for the first time who got my book a few months ago and had severe high blood pressure and was on 3 medications, a fairly young guy in his early 50s. And, his father had high blood pressure and got the same line. And now, in the course of 3 months, he's completely off of all of his high blood pressure medicines. And all he did was follow the recommendations in the plant paradox. And that's why he ended up seeing me. Actually, I walked in the room and he gave me a big hug. And he says, why didn't my doctors know this? And it's not really the doctor's fault. We have been taught as physicians that these things are genetic, they're inescapable, they have to be managed. And I use the example of, let's suppose you catch pneumonia, and I see you and I say, you've got pneumonia. And I'm going to manage your pneumonia for the rest of your life, and you're going to take these pills to manage your pneumonia. And my patient would look at me and say, "Wait a minute, what kind of quack are you? I came here for some antibiotics, and I'm going to take some antibiotics for a week, and we're going to get rid of the pneumonia." And of course, that would be the right thing to do. So to think that something like high blood pressure or high cholesterol or arthritis is something that we should manage with drugs is really pretty ludicrous. We can get rid of these things. You're not designed to have high blood pressure or high cholesterol or arthritis or depression or an autoimmune disease. So it's actually pretty amazing.
And so the real culprit here is inflammation, and the lectins are causing the inflammation. Have you found that different people respond in different ways to lectins? Like some people may be less inflammatory towards certain lectins and other people more inflammatory towards certain lectins.
Yeah, great question. I've been blessed to meet a lot of people who I call canaries, from the expression a canary in a coal mine. Long ago, coal miners couldn't smell the poisonous gases, and so they would carry canaries down into the mines, and if the canary stopped chirping and flitting about, they would run because the canary was far more sensitive than they were. And I have met a large number of people who are very sensitive to lectins. And many people are not, at least on the surface, sensitive to them. And yet we can see it underneath in markers that I've published about of inflammatory cytokines. The longer I have done this, the more I'm convinced that most of our ailments, most of our diseases do come from our interaction with these lectin-containing plants. And one of the reasons I say that is that there are societies that don't eat major lectin-containing foods, and they, in fact, don't have our diseases. And I talk about one group of Pacific Islanders who are called the Kitavans or Kitavans. And these are a fascinating group of people who have been extensively studied by a professor from Sweden by the name of Stefan Lindeberg. And these folks live into their mid-90s with no medical care. They smoke like fiends, and they have never been found to have coronary artery disease or a stroke or cancer. And they eat primarily a tuber called a taro root. And they use a lot of coconut oil, and they eat a small amount of fish and fruits and vegetables. And they are thin, but they don't exercise very much. And they defy a lot of logic until you realize that they don't eat a lot of lectin-containing foods. And they actually feed their gut bugs, their microbiome, the foods that keep the microbiome healthy. And that's another part of the plant paradox that, if you want, we can talk about. But so lectins are a real mischief maker. Now, why are some people more susceptible? We actually have an amazing defense system against lectins. We're not just standing by waiting for plants to kill us. There's actually been a balance of power that's evolved between plants wanting to be not eaten and animals wanting to eat them. And as I talk about in the book, we've got a whole defensive lineup against plants, including mucus. I'll give you an example. The next time you bite into a hot pepper, which is a lectin-containing food, your nose will start running. And your nose starts running because you're producing mucus to trap the lectins that you just ate. In fact, speaking of hot peppers, we're the only animal that would ever take a second bite out of a hot pepper. No other animal's stupid enough to do that because the plant has provided you with a warning that you really shouldn't eat me. But we do. So that mucus is designed to trap lectins. The other thing that we have evolved is stomach acid. And stomach acid is pretty good about breaking down proteins, and lectins are proteins. It's not perfect, but it does a pretty good job. And so every time we take a Prilosec or an Nexium, we actually stop making acid, and that allows lectins right on through. The third thing that's happened to us is that we have a lot of bugs in our gut that are actually pretty good about eating lectins. Believe it or not, there are bacteria that love gluten, and they are pretty good about degrading gluten. And by the way, gluten is a lectin. That's why it's pretty mischievous, but it's actually a minor lectin. There's far worse things than gluten. So we have this whole defense system, but if we take a round of antibiotics, we kill off that defense system. Or if we eat meat, chicken, beef, pork, that has been fed antibiotics, being raised in factory farms, and regardless of what you see on the label, they have been given antibiotics. Those antibiotics remain in those meats, and we eat those antibiotics and kill off our microbiome. So this is all in the book. It's called The 7 Deadly Disruptors. And it's one of the big reasons that we now see this rash of autoimmune disease, this rash of depression, arthritis that we never used to see before.
And it's just fascinating to me that we have all these natural defense mechanisms and we're just, ignoring them, basically. And then to further that into the pharmaceutical world, where as opposed to, hey, there's a hole in the bottom of the ship, we're sinking, it's not, okay, well, let's fix the hole. It's like, no, let's just see how many times we can plug it over and over and over again, never actually fixing the problem on why your ship is sinking. So lectins get past all of this, and they get into our system. What happens then?
So lectins are a foreign protein. And just to give you an example of how to think about it, if you get a splinter under your skin, it gets all red and irritated and swollen, and that is inflammation. And the splinter is a foreign protein, and your body generates white cells to come and attack it. Well, lectins are foreign proteins, and they have this unique ability to open up the wall of our gut and cause leaky gut. Leaky gut's caused by lectins. And once it gets through the wall of our gut, our immune system, our white blood cells, about 65% of all of our white blood cells are lining our intestinal wall. Why? Because that's where the troublemakers are going to get through. So we incite inflammation, just like a splinter got through us. And one of the things I talk about in the book is one of the reasons we store fat in our gut, a beer belly, if you will, is because that's the site of the war. And as I talk about in the book, we're actually stockpiling food and supplies for our soldiers, which is our white blood cells. And that's why we store fat there. And one of the fascinating things is that most people say you should eat an anti-inflammatory diet. And there's nothing wrong with that, but your example of the leaky boat is exactly right. If you've got a bunch of leaks in the bottom of your boat, you can take a bucket and start bailing. And that's exactly what anti-inflammatory things do. You're just bailing. And if you got a bigger hole, you're going to need a bigger bucket. But what you have to do instead is plug the holes. And if lectins are making the holes, then getting lectins out of your diet will plug the holes. So I want to get inflammation at its source, not just treat the inflammation.
And is there anything that you would recommend to, you can remove the lectins, obviously, but do you have people go through any way to reduce inflammation in the immediate sense, like it will be reduced over time, or also focusing on fixing the gut?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to get these lectin-containing foods out of your diet. Our microbiome has been so destroyed that you really do have to get this defensive barrier back up. Now, people should understand that most probiotics, those are the living bacteria, actually get destroyed by stomach acid, and very few probiotics ever make it into your gut. There's one probiotic that's a spore, and it's called Bacillus coagulans, and there won't be a test, but it's abbreviated BC30. And it's available over the counter. A company called Schiff Digestive Advantage makes it. I also have the license for it in my product, which is called Vital Reds, that a lot of people know from Gundry MD. But this is by far the best probiotic there is because it's a spore and it survives gastric acid. You could take probiotics all day, and if you don't give these bacteria the food that they need to eat, they're not going to grow. And so prebiotics, which are the fibers that the probiotics need to grow, are equally, if not more so, important in getting your gut flora back. I make the joke that, so probiotics are grass seed, and if I give somebody some grass seed here in the desert, and they come back 2 months later and said, "You sold me bad grass seed because it didn't grow." And I said, "Well, what did you do?" And they said, "Well, I sprinkled it out on the sand and it didn't grow." And I said, "Well, did you water it?" "Well, no, you didn't tell me to water it." "Well, did you fertilize it?" "No, you didn't tell me to fertilize it." I said, "Well, what did you expect?" So it's the same thing with probiotics. You can take these things, but if you don't give these bugs what they need to grow, they will die off. So where do you get prebiotics? Well, prebiotics are primarily resistant starches, tubers, long-chain sugars, like fructooligosaccharides. One of the most common ones is inulin. Inulin is in a lot of foods. It's in, for instance, radicchio. It's in Belgian endive. It's in Jerusalem artichokes, sometimes called sunchokes. It's in a lot of resistant starches like sweet potatoes. Jicama is a great choice. I actually had some jicama sticks and used them to dip into my guacamole. And guacamole is full of fiber, but people should realize that traditional guacamole is not made with tomatoes. So don't put tomatoes in your guacamole.
And one thing I have to ask, because we're into the gut now, and say that problem's being fixed, but I think what a lot of people don't know, but you've mentioned a few times, or people don't make this connection, is people suffering from depression. Can helping that with fixing their diet or removing lectins. How does that work? How is the brain affected?
Two ways. There are experiments in rats where you can inject lectins into their belly, and they will become depressed and anxious. They will not seek out food. They will cower in a corner and not explore their space. Now, we know that this happens because researchers have proven that lectins climb up a nerve that goes from your gut to your brain called the vagus nerve and actually affect nerve cells. And there's some very good research that I cite in the Plant Paradox that lectins are a major cause of Parkinson's disease, just as an aside. But the other thing that lectins do is, people who are depressed have a very altered gut flora for several reasons. Number one, back in the 1930s, people with severe depression were actually institutionalized in sanitariums. And a very interesting experiment was done with some depressed people. They were given enemas and laxatives to clean out their gut. And then they were given fecal enemas, fecal transplants from happy people. And these depressed individuals became happy. And that's now been shown over and over again that the major source of the happy hormone serotonin is made by bacteria in the gut. And interestingly enough, anyone who's on antidepressants know that these are what are called SSRIs, or serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And in fact, we get all of our serotonin from our gut bugs. And as I talk about in the book, one of the things that's happened to us in recent years is the use of glyphosate. Most people know it as a Roundup, that's sprayed on crops to kill weeds and also to dry out crops for harvesting. And it's been shown that glyphosate prevents bacteria in our gut from using the amino acids that make serotonin. And so we know that glyphosate is in everything now. It's sprayed on standard corn, standard wheat, standard standard canola seeds, and it's fed to animals, and glyphosate is in all the foods that we eat. So the next time you're having corn chips and wondering why you're depressed, one of the reasons is that your corn chips have Roundup in them, and you've stopped your bacteria from making serotonin. Really.
Wow, that's incredible. And I think it's very important to highlight how that all works, and bringing that all the way back to the lectin. And how did you originally discover this? It sounds like you kind of had a journey, a bunch of different events that led you to it. But what was like the one thing that you're like, no, I think this is it? Because a lot of people talk about gluten and other things that can cause inflammation in the body, and you kind of landed on lectins specifically.
Well, one of I guess the real eye opener was after my first book was published, one of my really early adapters was a gentleman I talk about in the Plant Paradox by the name of Tony. And Tony had vitiligo, which is the loss of pigmentation in your skin. Michael Jackson had vitiligo. And Tony had gone on my program, and he called me up. He says, "Hey, I got to show you something. Can I come up there?" And he walks in, and all of his vitiligo was gone. All of his pigmentation had returned. And he said, "What do you think about this?" And I said, "Wow, that's amazing." And he said, "Well, what do you think? Why is this?" And I could have just said, "Well, this is a very anti-inflammatory diet, and that's why your vitiligo is gone." And I could have left it at that, but I'm a researcher all my life. So I said, "Why the heck did this happen?" And it turns out that the cells that make pigment in our skin are called melanocytes. And melanocytes are actually modified nerve cells that migrate to the skin in early embryonic life. And I knew that the plant defense system against insects was aimed at paralyzing insects and killing their nerves. And their system was lectins. So I looked at my original list of foods to not eat, and I kind of started looking at it, and I said, "Son of a gun, I am asking people to eat a very limited lectin diet." And I realized that what was happening was that Tony, and subsequently thousands of other people, the lectins were causing his own immune system to attack his melanocytes as if they were lectins. And it's called molecular mimicry. Lauren Cordain, a professor at Colorado State who wrote the original paleo diet, described this, and I think he's absolutely right. And lectins cause our immune system to attack other cells or other proteins in our body, which is the cause of autoimmune disease. And in Tony's case, it was attacking his melanocytes. And when we took lectins out of him and plugged the holes, there was no longer any interest in attacking melanocytes. And we've seen this subsequently in numerous individuals. So that's really was the aha moment for me that I was onto something with lectins as the cause of autoimmune disease.
Yeah, good thing you didn't just write it off to, well, you're eating healthy, things should get better, Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, it was more than that.
All right, so I'm going to ask you what we call the book question, just to kind of get a broad picture. I mean, you've already written some books, but if you could influence future generations. So if there was a nationwide curriculum implemented and the president called you up and said that you're responsible for one chapter of this book rolling out nationwide, so every single child in America will have to read your chapter and be tested on and pass your specific chapter before they can graduate high school, what would your chapter be about?
Exactly what we just talked. The chapter is there are certain foods that the federal government and the Department of Agriculture has told you to eat for good health, and I want you immediately to stop eating them if you actually want good health. Because the purpose of the Department of Agriculture is not to give you good health, it's to sell agricultural products. So it's the antithesis of the advice that you should take away.
And what kind of strides do you feel that we're making as health, communicators in the world right now? Do you think that we are making a significant dent in helping people back to the path they should be on, or do you think that we have a long way to go?
Both. Where people realize increasingly that something's wrong, that they seem to be doing everything right and it's not working. For instance, last week, the president of the American Heart Association, a 52-year-old gentleman who was following, obviously, all of the American Heart Guidelines, had a heart attack at the National Convention and had a stent at age 52 because he was doing all the usual dietary advice of a low-fat, high-grain and bean diet. And one would hope that this would get his attention, but in fact, he came on after his heart attack and said, well, this is all the more reason that we should follow guidelines because I've done everything right and look what happened to me and it's my genetics. And that is just ridiculous. So we know something's wrong. So people are beginning to listen to people who practice functional medicine. I have no idea what the word functional medicine means. Jeff Bland is a good friend of mine who invented that term. I practice restorative medicine, which I like a lot better, but functional or restorative medicine is gaining ground. But we have to remember that all of this goes against all medical training. Medical training is done by big pharma and big agriculture and big chemical. And so we're really going against the grain, but people are beginning to realize that something's wrong and that they need to take things into their own hands.
And have you seen any shift in the medical community themselves? Like, I'm sure not all doctors out there want to just be, not truly helping their patients. I don't think that any doctor would really have that desire. I don't think they just want to always be helping their symptoms,
Yes. I just got a message yesterday from a doctor in Brooklyn, New York, who has been following me and wants to come out and spend some time. And I have doctors fly out here and spend a week with me and learn these principles. But I have family practice residents who rotate with me in my clinic. And I had a particularly really talented young woman who clearly got the bug, and she's in her third year of residency and will graduate this year. And I said, you've really got the bug. Why don't you consider going into this? So she came back a few days later and she said, I talked with my counselor, my director, and said, well, good for you, but that's ridiculous because to make it in family practice, you have to see 40 patients a day to make an income enough to support you. And, Dr. Gundry, if he has a new patient, spends an hour with them, and any subsequent visit is a half an hour. So, he can only see very few patients every day. So, you'll starve to death. So that's a really dumb idea. And this is a true story. So that's what we're going up against. The insurance-based model doesn't pay for good health yet. And that's crazy.
Yeah, it doesn't make any bit of sense to me. The things they won't cover or support. But I guess that's just the system we've built over time, intentionally or unintentionally, whichever way you want to look at it.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Go ahead.
No, you're right. Unfortunately, I think it's probably intentional, but I'll give people the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to move to the quick-fire questions of the show. Are you ready?
Sure.
What's the hardest workout you've ever done?
My wife and I one year decided to be crazy and to run a hike in Cinque Terre, Italy, which is kind of straight up a whole bunch of stairs, and we wanted to beat a boat back. Almost did it. That was probably the hardest workout I ever did.
Sounds like fun.
It was, but it was really hard.
Yeah. All right. In your opinion, what's the best activity for building mental toughness?
Oh, that's a tough one. From from personal experience, the best activity for building mental toughness is doing a 10-hour third time redo triple valve operation, but you can't relate to that as readers. I guess the hardest thing, the best workout for mental toughness is become an expert on something you're interested in.
And just that field of study, sharpening the axe on a daily basis is what will be.
You gotta, you have to become the expert on that, and don't until you have mastered everything there is to know about that subject.
I really, really like that answer. All right. If you could only have one piece of equipment to train with for the rest of your life, what would it be?
TRX.
Oh, yeah. You like the TRX?
Yep.
Awesome.
I actually travel with it. If you don't have a TRX, and TRXs are cheap, your body is actually a great piece of equipment. And, there's some great books on Be Your Own Gym, but TRX makes things so easy.
And I have another question for you, not one that we typically ask, but I would like to ask you, what's your favorite non-lectin containing snack?
Nuts. Absolutely. I have the world famous Gundry nut mix is equal amounts of pistachios, macadamia nuts, and walnuts. And I think every human being should have about a half a cup of nuts a day. And I don't just think that. There's tremendous literature, a lot of it out of my colleagues at Loma Linda University, who've shown that about a half a cup of nuts a day dramatically extend lifespan, dramatically reduce heart disease, reduce cancer rates. So it's just probably the best snack there is.
Awesome. And then the question of the show, what is the best advice you have for becoming a better human? And this is 100% open-ended.
Do what you love and love what you do. And boy, I'll tell you, again, if you really find what you love and then do that, you'll just have the best life in the world. And I guess my other advice, which I made on a relationship show, is there is a soulmate for everybody, and don't settle until you find that soulmate. So there's my words of advice.
I appreciate that. Now, I've had an incredible time talking to you, and I've learned a tremendous amount, but what's the best place for people to learn more about you and your work?
So you can go to gundrymd.com, or you can go to drgundry.com, and you can sign up for my daily newsletter, and you can get my blogs. I have a YouTube channel, the Dr. Gundry YouTube channel, where you'll see whole bunches of videos, recipes, fun tips. My new book, The Plant Paradox Cookbook, will be out in April, and 100 more new recipes using a lot of James Beard Award-winning chefs. And it's a lot of fun, and they're easy to do. One of the things I wanted to make sure is that somebody in Asheville, North Carolina, can make these recipes and not have to live in sunny California. How's that?
That sounds awesome, and I look forward to picking that book up in April. And I really appreciate your time. I'll link to everything that you just mentioned in the show notes for this episode. Dr. Gundry, I really appreciate you being on the show.
Okay, and thanks for having me.
your best. Losers always whine about their best.